When the Henrio County Courthouse burned in 1865, most assumed the flames consumed nothing but Confederate records and debt ledgers. But courthouse clerk Josiah Peyton wrote in his private diary that among the ashes, workers found a locked iron chest containing 23 pages of testimony so disturbing that the Reconstruction authorities ordered every copy destroyed. The testimony belonged to a woman identified only as the Silent Giant, a slave woman who stood 6'7" tall and had not spoken a single word in 18 years. Her silence ended on March 14, 1863, when a Union surgeon examined her in a contraband camp outside Richmond. What she whispered to him about her master and her 9 daughters caused 3 witnesses to vomit, and the surgeon himself requested immediate transfer to frontline duty rather than document what he had heard. The military suppressed her account. The surgeon died of typhoid 6 weeks later, and the woman vanished from all official records. But fragments of her story survived in private letters, hidden journals, and the nightmares of those who heard it. The woman who would become known as Big Sarah arrived at Greenbrier Plantation in Powhatan County, Virginia on an August morning in 1831. The same week Nat Turner began his rebellion 70 miles to the southeast. Greenbrier sat on 2,000 acres of tobacco land along the James River, far enough from Richmond to feel isolated, but close enough that its owner, Nathaniel Crowther, could maintain business connections with the city's merchant class. The plantation house was an imposing 3-story structure of red brick with white columns Crowther had installed in 1828 to match the Greek Revival fashion sweeping Virginia's planter elite. 12 slave cabins formed a neat row behind the main house, each housing 6 to 10 people in conditions even by 1831 standards were recognized as harsh. Crowther had inherited Greenbrier from his father in 1824, along with debts that nearly destroyed the family name. At 31, he had restored some profitability through tobacco cultivation and what he called strategic breeding programs, a practice increasingly common as the domestic slave trade expanded after the overseas trade's abolition in 1808. His wife Constance had died in childbirth in 1829, leaving him with no legitimate children, but a plantation to run and a reputation to rebuild among the Tidewater aristocracy. The woman who stepped off the wagon that August morning was unlike any slave the other captives at Greenbrier had ever seen. She stood well over 6 feet tall, with broad shoulders and hands so large they could palm a man's head like a melon. The slave trader who brought her, Vernon Caldwell from Charleston, claimed she was 22 and born on a rice plantation in the South Carolina Lowcountry. He sold her to Crowther for $800, a significant sum reflecting her size and what Caldwell described as her exceptional breeding potential. Her name, Caldwell said, was Sarah. She had been separated from a previous owner's estate after an incident of defiance. When Crowther asked what kind, Caldwell's expression hardened. He said only that Sarah had watched something happen to her mother, and since that day she had not spoken a single word to anyone, white or black. Crowther examined her teeth, hands, legs. He had her walk back and forth. She moved with a strange mechanical quality, eyes fixed on the middle distance, never meeting anyone's gaze. Her silence did not trouble Crowther. In fact, he seemed to prefer it. What Crowther did not tell Caldwell or anyone else was that he had been looking for exactly this kind of woman. Since his wife's death, Crowther had become obsessed with improving the stock of his slave population. He kept detailed records in a leather journal documenting heights, weights, physical characteristics, and what he termed reproductive capacity. He had read treatises on animal husbandry and begun applying those principles to human beings. He believed he could breed a generation of slaves stronger, more obedient, and more valuable than any before. Sarah was, in his mind, the perfect foundation. Her height and strength meant her children would inherit those traits. Her silence meant she would not corrupt them with stories of freedom or resistance. And her apparent brokenness, the blank expression, mechanical movements, suggested a spirit already crushed, so she would not fight what was to come. The other slaves at Greenbrier watched Sarah's arrival with curiosity and pity. An older woman named Bess, the unofficial matriarch of the slave quarters, later told another captive she knew immediately something was wrong with Sarah, not in her mind, but in her soul. She had seen that look before on people who had witnessed things so terrible words could no longer contain them. Silence in those cases was not weakness, but a fortress, the last defense against a world that had taken everything else. Crowther assigned Sarah to field work initially, but within 2 weeks relocated her to a separate cabin, a small storage structure apart from the other quarters. He told the overseer, brutal Virgil Stanton, that Sarah required special management and was not to be worked in the same crews as others. Stanton, with Crowther for 3 years and learned not to question strange instructions, simply nodded. That September, on a new moon night, Crowther visited Sarah's cabin first time. He carried a lantern, whiskey bottle, and leather strap. When he emerged 2 hours later, his shirt torn, knuckles bleeding, his expression was satisfaction. He told Stanton next morning Sarah had accepted her new role. From now on, she was let completely to his supervision. No other white man entered her cabin. No other slave spoke to her without permission. She worked fields by day, but nights belonged to Crowther. The other slaves knew what this meant. They had seen it before, though never so calculated. Bess tried approaching Sarah during a lunch break to offer comfort, but Sarah stared through her like glass, her silence absolute. When Bess touched her arm, Sarah flinched violently, dropping her water gourd, but made no sound, not a gasp, not a cry. By December 1831, Sarah's pregnancy signs visible. Crowther recorded the date in his journal with satisfaction, noting measurements, estimating birth late spring. He fed her better than others, more meat, vegetables, milk from dairy, to ensure child healthy, strong. He had plans for this child, all that followed. Other slaves watched Sarah's belly grow through winter. They saw Crowther visit every few nights, sometimes bringing cloth or small gifts presented as to prized mare. They saw Sarah's silence deepen, moving like a ghost in a body too large to hide. Some women helped when could, leaving extra food near cabin, offering quiet nod in fields, but Sarah never responded. Eyes fixed distant, unreachable point, lips sealed as sewn shut. Bess later told granddaughter she felt dark gathering over Greenbrier that winter. Air heavier than should, birds avoiding Sarah's cabin area. Bess didn't believe curses or haunts traditionally, but believed evil, humankind needing no supernatural explanation. Believed Nathaniel Crowther bringing something terrible into being, unsatisfied until consumed everything in its path. Sarah's first child, born May 3, 1832, during thunderstorm oldest slaves claimed worst in 20 years. Midwife Patience, skilled delivering hundreds babies various plantations, later told Bess birth unremarkable. Baby large, healthy girl, mother's height evident in long limbs. What disturbed Patience, Sarah's complete silence through labor. Most women screamed, cried, cursed, prayed. Sarah, no sound. Stared ceiling beams of the cabin, tears streaming, mouth closed. When Patience placed baby in arms, Sarah looked at child, expression Patience described years later, the saddest thing ever witnessed. Not sadness, exhaustion, or pain, but deeper, grief seeming no future. Crowther named child Delilah, recorded the birth in journal meticulous detail. 8 pounds, 3 ounces, 22 inches. Perfect specimens, wrote Crowther, both mother and daughter. Visited cabin next day with small silver rattle, object grotesquely out of place, sparse dirt-floored roam. Placed babies in hand, smiled satisfaction of a man whose investment paying dividends. Sarah watched empty eyes, holding daughter close, said nothing. First year Delilah's life, Sarah allowed keep her child. Crowther believed, based on readings on animal breeding, mother's milk and care early months strengthened child's constitution. Continued to visit Sarah's cabin regularly. By Delilah 8 months, Sarah was pregnant again. Pattern established. Crowther no intention stopping. Second child, Rebecca, born March 1833. Third, Judith, November same year. Fourth, Ruth, July 1834.
Each pregnancy, same ritual. Crowther's visits, Sarah's silence, birth, attended patients, documentation, Crowther's journal. Each time Sarah held her newborn daughter, same unbearable sadness expression. Each time remained silent. Other slaves understood the full scope of Crowther's design, not simply taking Sarah a concubine as many slaveholders did, systematically breeding her, treating livestock, explicit goal producing many children possible, every single child a girl. Not chance, older slaves whispered, design. Crowther wanted daughters because daughters bred in turn, planning generations ahead, building an improved line. By 1836, Sarah had birthed 6 daughters, Delilah, Rebecca, Judith, Ruth, Esther, Naomi. All showed mother's unusual height. Delilah 4, already tall for a 6-year-old. Crowther delighted. Begun separating